Adventures from the original Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Adventures from the original Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll's story adapted and abridged for little children by Marcia Martin. The illustrations are after Sir John Tenniel, drawn in color by Laszlo Matule. Have you ever seen a white rabbit wearing a waistcoat and holding a large gold watch? The first time Alice saw him, she had been lying on the grass, wondering sleepily if she should get up and pick daisies. She was so surprised to see him and to hear him say, "Dear, dear, I'm late again," that when he popped into a rabbit hole, she popped in right after him. That was where her adventures in Wonderland began. One of the first things Alice saw was a table made of glass. On the table lay a gold key, and when Alice found the lock in which the key fitted, she realized that she was too big to walk through the tiny doorway. Then she noticed a bottle that said, "Drink me." Alice drank it and immediately began getting smaller. Now, she thought, I can find out what's behind the little door. But poor Alice had left the gold key on the table, and now she was too tiny to reach it. She sat down to have a good cry, and then she found a little box that said, "Eat me." Alice ate the cake she found in the box. She began growing quickly, and she grew so big that her feet seemed miles away. At least I can reach the key, she thought. But poor Alice! She was now so big that all she could do was to lie down and look through the door with one eye. At the end of a long passageway, Alice saw a lovely garden, and she wanted more than ever to get through the door. Suddenly, she heard footsteps pattering toward her. It was the white rabbit, carrying white gloves and a fan. When he saw her, he dropped the gloves and the fan and ran off. Alice picked up the rabbit's fan and gloves and began to fan herself, thinking, "Things are so queer down here. I wonder if I'm still Alice. Maybe if I recite some of my lessons, I'll find out if I'm really Alice." So she tried to say, "How doth the little busy bee?" But it came out like this. "How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws." "I'm sure that's not right," thought Alice. She looked down at her hands and noticed that she had put on one of the rabbit's gloves. "I must be getting small again," she thought. She realized it was the fan that was changing her size and quickly threw it down. Now for the door, thought Alice, but everything had disappeared. Instead, she found herself in a forest. She spied a mushroom about the same size as she was, and when she had looked on all sides of it, she stretched on tiptoe and looked on top. And there she saw a large blue caterpillar who asked in a sleepy voice, "Who are you?" "I really don't know, sir," replied Alice. She explained about her adventures and especially about reciting the poem all wrong. "Try 'You are old, Father William,'" suggested the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think, at your age, it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain, but now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that?" "In my youth," said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, "I kept all my limbs very supple, by the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box, allow me to sell you a couple." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life." "You are old," said the youth. "One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever. Yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever?" "I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. "Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs." "That is wrong from beginning to end," said the caterpillar, sliding off the mushroom. As he crawled away, Alice heard him say, "One side of the mushroom will make you bigger, and one side smaller." "But which is which?" thought Alice, walking round and round the mushroom. She nibbled a little first from one side and then from the other, until she was the right size again. Then she went on through the woods. In a clearing she saw a little house and knocked on the door. When there was no answer, Alice opened the door. As she did so, dishes, pots, and pans sailed past her. Alice found herself in a kitchen. A cook was at the stove, pouring so much pepper into a big pot of soup that everyone was sneezing wildly. On a stool sat a duchess, holding a baby and singing this song: "Speak roughly to your little boy, and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy, because he knows it teases. Wow, wow, wow." While the duchess sang, the cook threw every sort of dish and pan at her, but the duchess paid no attention. "Here," called the duchess to Alice, "you may take the baby." And she threw the baby to Alice and walked out. Alice caught the baby and ran outside, thinking, "Goodness, something will surely happen to the poor thing in there." The baby started to grunt, and Alice, worried about these noises, looked at the child. Much to her surprise, it was turning into a pig. When it was really a pig, Alice put it down and watched it run off. She had walked on just a short distance when she saw, in the branches of a tree, a large cat that was grinning from ear to ear. Alice knew this was a Cheshire cat, and so she said very politely, "Please, Cheshire cat, which way do I go now?" The cat waved its paw. "In that direction lives the March Hare, and in the other direction lives the Mad Hatter." And saying that, it vanished slowly, starting with its tail and ending with its grin. "Dear, dear," thought Alice, "I've often seen a cat without a grin, but this is the first time I've seen a grin without a cat." She had not gone much farther when she came to the house of the March Hare. A long table was set out in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Mad Hatter were having tea at it. Between them sat a dormouse, fast asleep. "No room! No room!" they shouted when they saw Alice. "Why, there's plenty of room," she answered, seating herself. "What day is it?" the Mad Hatter asked Alice, shaking his watch. "The 4th," replied Alice. "2 days wrong! I told you butter wouldn't suit the works," said the Hatter to the March Hare, scowling. "But it was the best butter," said the Hare, meekly taking the watch and dipping it in his tea. "Let's each move one place," suggested the Hatter, and they all got up and moved. But the Hatter was the only one who got a clean plate, and Alice was quite upset when she found herself at the March Hare's place, for he had just spilled the milk. "This is the stupidest tea party I ever saw," Alice thought. The last thing she saw as she left was the Mad Hatter and the March Hare trying to put the Dormouse into the teapot. After Alice walked quite a distance, she turned a sharp corner. There, standing under a tree, with their arms around each other, stood two fat little men, dressed exactly alike. One had Tweedledee on his collar, and the other had Tweedledum. Alice immediately thought of the old rhyme and said it aloud. Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle, for Tweedledum said Tweedledee had spoiled his nice new rattle. Just then flew down a monstrous crow, as black as a tar barrel, which frightened both the heroes so they quite forgot their quarrel. "Do you like poetry?" asked Tweedledee. "Well, some poetry," Alice said. At this both brothers began. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd, because it was the middle of the night. The walrus and the carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. "If this were only cleared away," they said, "it would be grand." If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the walrus said, that they could get it clear? "I doubt it," said the carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "O oysters, come and walk with us," the walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk, along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each." Then 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4. And thick and fast they came at last, and more, and more, and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "A loaf of bread," the walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the walrus said. "Do you admire the view?" "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far, and made them trot so quick." The carpenter said nothing but, "The butter's spread too thick." "I weep for you," the walrus said, "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "O oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none. And this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. "The walrus and the carpenter were both very unpleasant characters," said Alice after a pause. She was just going to leave when Tweedledee sprang up and in a choking voice said, "Do you see that?" "It's only a rattle," said Alice, after examining the little white thing. "I knew it was!" cried Tweedledee, tearing his hair. "It's my nice new rattle!" And his voice rose to a scream. "Of course we must fight," said Tweedledum calmly, and turning to Alice, he said, "I hope you're good at pinning on things?" Alice waited while the brothers went into their house and came out with all sorts of blankets and pillows and buckets. When they were finally dressed for the battle, Alice thought they looked more like bundles of old clothes than anything else. "You'd better hurry," said Alice. "It looks as though it will rain." And indeed, the sky was getting darker every minute. "What a big black cloud that is," said Alice. "And I do believe it's got wings." "The crow! The crow!" cried Tweedledum, and the two brothers ran so fast that they were out of sight in a minute. As soon as the sky grew light again, Alice continued on her way. In a few minutes she came to a high, narrow wall. Sitting on the wall, his legs crossed, was a very large egg with eyes and a nose and a mouth. Alice saw clearly that it was Humpty Dumpty. She repeated softly, "Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty in his place again." At these words, Humpty Dumpty teetered so sharply on the wall that Alice was quite sure he would fall. "Don't you think you'd be safer on the ground?" she asked politely. "Of course not," replied Humpty Dumpty. "But if I ever did fall off, the king himself has promised me to send all his horses and all his men," Alice finished. "You've been listening at keyholes," Humpty Dumpty cried, and he closed his eyes and said very firmly, "Goodbye." Alice thought that was a very strong hint and walked away. She had not gone far when she came to a tree with a door in it. "That's queer," thought Alice, but she opened the door and walked in. Once more she found herself by the glass table, which still had the little gold key on it. "This time I shall manage better," she said, taking the key. Since, in her apron pocket, she had saved some of the mushroom, she nibbled at it until she was just the right size. Then she opened the little door, walked through the passageway, and found herself at last in the beautiful garden. Near the entrance stood a lovely white rose bush, but 3 gardeners were busily painting the roses red. "Why are you doing that?" asked Alice. One of the gardeners answered, "Why, this bush was supposed to have red roses, and if the queen was to find out they are white, she would cut our heads off." Just then another gardener called out, "The queen! The queen!" and all 3 threw themselves face down on the ground. Alice looked around eagerly and saw a long procession of children and guests, and last of all, the king and queen of hearts. "What's your name?" the queen asked, stopping in front of Alice. Alice answered and curtsied politely, but she thought, "Why, they're all nothing but a pack of cards." "It's time to play croquet!" shouted the queen, and after everyone ran about for a while, they finally settled down at their places. Alice had never seen such a strange croquet game. The balls were live hedgehogs, the mallets were flamingos, and the soldiers doubled over on their hands and feet to make the wickets. Alice had a difficult time, for the flamingo would not keep its head down, the hedgehogs kept unrolling, and the soldiers kept walking off. The queen went stamping wildly about, shouting, "Off with their heads!" until only the king, the queen, and Alice were left. Quite out of breath, the queen asked Alice, "Have you seen the Mock Turtle yet?" And before Alice had a chance to reply, she took Alice's hand and ran with her until they came to a large rock. Sitting on the rock was the Mock Turtle, looking sad, his eyes full of tears. "Sing her a song," said the queen. "I must see about the trial." The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began, in a voice sometimes choked with sobs, to sing this: "Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen, who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup, soup of the evening, beautiful soup, beautiful soup, beautiful soup, soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, who cares for fish, game, or any other dish? Who would not give all else for 2 pennyworth only of beautiful soup? Pennyworth only of beautiful soup, Beautiful soup, beautiful soup, soup of the evening. Beautiful, beautiful soup. As he finished, they heard a cry of, "The trial's beginning!" "Come on," called the Mock Turtle, and hurried off with Alice. When they arrived, the king and queen were seated on their thrones with a great crowd of birds and beasts, as well as the whole pack of cards around them. The White Rabbit stood near the king. In a moment he blew 3 blasts on his trumpet and read from a scroll which he held in his hand. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts, and took them quite away." "Call the first witness," said the king, and the rabbit blew on his trumpet again. The first witness was the Mad Hatter, who came in still holding a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. The queen stared hard at him, and he shook so much that he took a bite out of the teacup instead of the bread. At that moment, Alice suddenly felt herself growing larger again. "Call the next witness," cried the king, and much to Alice's surprise, she heard the White Rabbit call out, "Alice!" She jumped up, quite forgetting how large she had grown. The king read out from his book, "Rule 42, all persons more than a mile high to leave the court." "I'm not a mile high," said Alice, "and anyhow I shan't go. Why, you're nothing but a pack of cards." At this, the whole pack of cards rose up in the air and came flying down on her. Alice gave a little scream and found herself lying in the field, brushing off some leaves which were falling on her. "Why, it's all been a dream," said Alice, and she ran home to tell everyone about her curious adventures in Wonderland.